So the Lamm Jewish Library of Australia would like to thank you all for attending tonight's learning series discussion, The Case for Medical Cannabis with Fiona Patten MP and Tommy Huppert. My name's Joey. I'm the social media officer at the library, and I will also be your moderator / host for this evening's discussion. On behalf of the library chairperson, Dr. Rolene Lamm, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to you all, and in particular to our guests, Fiona and Tommy. Thank you guys for coming. So I'm just going to do a brief little bio on each, and then we're going to jump straight into the discussion. So Fiona Patten is the member for North Metropolitan Region in the Victorian Parliament's Legislative Council. She's the leader of the Reason Party. She was first elected in 2014 and re-elected again in 2018. Her decision to run for political office came after 20 years of advocating for the rights of small business owners, sexual health organisations, sexual freedoms and censorship reforms. In 2009, frustrated with the lack of social change on censorship, drug law reform, assisted dying and marriage equality, she founded the Australian Sex Party with her partner Robbie Swan. In 2017, the Australian Sex Party was dissolved to make way for the Reason Party, a movement of common sense where adults are treated as adults and children as children. Fiona, thank you for coming. Tommy is the founder and CEO of Cannatrek, one of the first enterprises in Australia that secured both federal and state government licenses to import cannabis seed, research, grow, process, manufacture, and distribute medical cannabis products. Understanding the tremendous value of medicinal cannabis as a major health disruptor and economic growth industry, especially on people who are not seeing results from traditional medicine, Tommy launched Cannatrek in 2015. Within 2 years, it had been awarded a second research license and began the journey of providing better quality of life to Australian patients. Prior to Cannatrek, Tommy worked in the spaces of education and arts. Thank you, Tommy, for coming as well. So I'm going to unmute you both and we're going to, I guess, jump straight into the conversation. The way I thought we would begin is, I guess, to frame the concept of medical cannabis and medicinal cannabis, because it can mean a lot of different things for a lot of people. And I think if we're going to have a discussion between the two of you, it's best to maybe frame what medical cannabis is from your opinion. So Tommy, we might start with you. What do we mean by medical cannabis? What's your take?
Well, thank you very much for having me today, and a pleasure to be here with Fiona and to the Lamm Library for making this event possible. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. So what is medical cannabis? I think the first question is, depends who you ask. If you ask a politician, and we'll hear soon from Fiona what that means. If you ask an economist, you'll get another answer. If you ask a patient or a Collins Street broker, you'll get a different answer from everyone. But I think if you ask the curious person, that's probably the majority of people who are interested to know more about medical cannabis. It's an ancient plant. It was used throughout literally centuries, thousands of years as the base of pharmacopoeia. And I remember going to Ballarat and looking at the pharmacy. There's a pharmacy store there, and you actually look on the shelf and you'll see tinctures of medical cannabis, and the pharmacist was probably growing it out the back, just like you see behind me, and extracting oil and serving it to his or her patients. So it's been around for a long time, and it's quite incredible that, from 2016 we actually have an industry. Today, Cannatrek is serving patients. We have over 7,000 patients that we have provided medicines to, and this is a product which makes no claims whatsoever, but it actually is helping people, and that's what drives us to do what we do.
Fiona, what does medical cannabis mean to you?
Look, I think for me, it was really important to carve out medicinal cannabis because cannabis has been an illicit drug in Australia, and around the world for 70 odd years. So while people wanted to maintain that prohibition on cannabis, it was recognizing that there were some medicinal and medical attributes to the cannabis plant and to the cannabis products that should be made available. And so for me, it's about medicinal cannabis is the products that we have carved out. So it's the products, and I think we'll just speak about Australia today or Victoria rather than looking at the looser definitions probably around the world. But here, it's the products to me that are grown by licensed growers such as Tommy and Cannatrek. It's products that are sold via prescription to patients through the doctor and through approval through the Therapeutic Goods Authority. And having said that, I would just probably add to confuse that when there was a study done just this year that actually was a survey of cannabis growers in Australia, and they weren't the legal ones, they weren't the Cannatreks or the little green farmers, they were the illicit growers. 70% said that they were growing for medicinal purposes, that they were growing to help people. So, but for me, when I try and talk about cannabis, medicinal cannabis, I talk about the products that are legally available now in Australia.
Very cool. So each of you provide a pretty unique perspective on the issue. Obviously, Tommy is heavily involved in the industry itself, and Fiona, you're coming at it from a political perspective, a legislative, regulatory perspective. Tommy, I might just ask, what does the industry look like nowadays? What are the big kind of movers and shakers, and what's happened in the industry over the last few years?
I think the last few years have provided maturity. In the first year, it was all about getting a license. There was a lot of clunky bureaucratic delays. The Office of Drug Control was created with a handful of people, and they had hundreds of applicants, and they got very quickly bottlenecked. We were very fortunate. We received the second license, so we were kind of a test case for the system, and everything we did was a new application or a new import or a new registration. So we were fortunate to work with the regulator very much hand in hand to debunk a lot of the bottlenecks. And in the last, I would say, last year we're seeing farms like ourselves coming up for the first time. There's only a handful of producers growing, and even less who actually have released product. So it's taken a good 4 or 5 years from literally building an industry from absolutely nothing. There were no consultants, there were no researchers, there was nothing existing whatsoever in 2016. Today, there's been over 130,000 approvals. There's hundreds of doctors prescribing every day. There's a mini industry which has been created, which is a real credit to all the stakeholders, including the government. And we're very proud that the government members are really helping to make this work, which is a very positive impact for us as industry players.
Well, we move to a member now who's working in the space. Fiona, what is it like politically and legislatively in the space? What kind of developments have we seen over the last few years?
Look, I agree with Tommy that we've come a long way, but I think we're still going very slowly, and we're probably not even meeting the expectations that governments had of this industry. And it is due to the red tape, and it is due to a lot of the slowness in enabling the businesses to do what they do best and get out there and grow plants and produce and manufacture quality products that help their patients. Victoria was the first state to do this, and I, politics is always personal. So we had been campaigning for medicinal cannabis in Australia for a number of years, as had many people before me. But it was young children with intractable epilepsy that finally won the fight. And I think it's probably the only drug that I'm aware of, the only medicine that I'm aware of, that when it was first legalized, it was only available for children. So in Victoria, when the first medicinal cannabis legislation passed, it was only available to people under the age of 18, which was quite an extraordinary, but it got us over the line, and it got the ball rolling. And soon after that, very soon after that, the federal government came in, introduced federal legislation. But I think there still is a slight mistrust about medicinal cannabis. There's still, and I see that, and we can talk about this later when we start talking about some of the other regulations that I think need to change. But there's, it seems nowadays probably everybody knows someone who has benefited from medicinal cannabis, or everyone has heard a story. I do kind of, I shake my head sometimes with my colleagues because they still don't have an understanding of it, and they think that it's a product that is very different to cannabis and it's quite a different product than what you see behind Tommy, that it's somehow a synthetic version of that. There's a lot of misunderstanding, but there's also this idea that we need to tightly control it. And this makes it incredibly difficult for patients, and it also makes it incredibly expensive for patients. We haven't been able to kind of hit the markets, the critical mass, because of the regulations that we have. We still have organisations like the AMA, the Medical Association, still being resistant to prescribing medicinal cannabis, but that is changing, and the government does have a strategic plan for the medicinal cannabis industry in Victoria. And I was just actually having a look at it before this evening, and we haven't met a lot of the benchmarks that governments had hoped to meet and hoped to be able to serve the patients of Victoria with this product in an accessible way and in an affordable way. And we haven't got there. I mean, I'm looking with glee at the photos behind Tommy, because I know we are going to get there. And I know that his company and many others are really ramping up production. But yeah, there's still a hesitancy there. There's still this notion that you've got to have tried benzodiazepines. You've got to have, been on opioids for years. You've got to have tried every single other drug before you can qualify to try medicinal cannabis. And I think it puts some very sick people through a lot of unnecessary hoops.
We're definitely going to discuss, I guess, legislation and regulation around the industry. You mentioned, though, that, in your opinion, we're going a bit too slow. I'd love to hear about the sentiment of what the issue is like for most of your colleagues in Parliament, and for the people that who are, let's say, political agents, whether they're in the financial industry or whatever it is. I'd love to hear what the sentiment is around them, specifically around medical cannabis, and if that may be contributing to the rate going slow, as you said.
Look, I think there is a lot of ignorance, and that's completely understandable. They still conflate medicinal cannabis with other products. They think that young men will go and see their doctor, tell their doctor that they have a sore thumb, get a prescription for medicinal cannabis, and then be on their way, to put it loosely, having bongs for breakfast. There are others that are really concerned that they've heard about the medical concerns around mental health and its links to cannabis use, and they've got those concerns. But most of it is unwarranted. Most of it is misunderstood. But it's also this idea, and I think it's the overregulation. It's the idea that somehow this is an extraordinarily dangerous product, that if we don't, absolutely control it in a very, very strict way, that somehow people will be harmed from it. Now, this is a product that has a very, very low harm threshold. I mean, I think I'm correct in saying that no one has ever died from cannabis, where you could not say that about just about any other prescription medication. There are some real allies in the Parliament. There's some people who really believe in it and would really like to see the industry move forward and further explore the qualities of the various cannabinoids, explore the endocannabinoid system in our bodies, and to see how we can understand it better and understand how we can treat more symptoms and illnesses. There's still this hesitancy around because it's cannabis.
I think you mentioned the word critical mass, and it's once we get there, which I think is closer, there'll be far more experiences, far more feedback from doctors and patients, and we're hearing about medicinal cannabis almost every day in the news, on a radio chat show. Here we are, an event tonight. So I think that's going to be a real important movement of how it's accepted, and we're really moving into a new realm. We're finding that medical cannabis can be looked at upon the entire range of medical indications. And we have to learn about the different cannabinoids through the endocannabinoid system. The doctors had about 5 or 10 minutes of it in their 6 years of medical school. So there needs to be training of doctors to be familiar with this new system and new product, which is quite unusual because we're talking about many different actives in a product, not one active pharmaceutical ingredient, which is the usual type of pharma drug. And this is a very unique type of approach to medicine, which is quite challenging. So it's like a massive clinical trial. We want to test all our medicines. We want to grab the real world data, provide analytics back to doctors and say, this product is helping someone have a better night's sleep or removing some pain. Talk about a natural product. What is one of the biggest challenges is usually pharma drugs take years and millions of dollars to bring to market. This product is not working that way. And that's why this industry is completely different.
Mm. I think, and I totally agree with you, Tommy, and I think it's really exciting, and we're seeing such really good results from a product, from a medicine that is fairly gentle on a human being's body. One of the big concerns, and I'm probably jumping ahead of myself, but I think one of the biggest barriers that I believe at the moment is the fact that a medicinal cannabis patient is prohibited from driving. Now, they can drive if they're on benzodiazepines, if they're on high-level opioids, they can drive on any other medication that may impair their driving. But there is a strict prohibition on a patient who may have a product that has very little of the psychoactive cannabinoid THC in it. It's largely a CBD product, but because of our drug driving laws and because we test for THC on roadside drug tests and when people have accidents, this is effectively, we have not been able to, as yet, carve out a medical exemption for those patients.
It's clearly, oh yeah, Tommy? I'm
sorry, Fiona, it's actually, the other complexity is every state will look at this question differently.
I know.
Which is another a minefield we have to walk through.
I know.
So different opinions. Obviously, this is affecting really people are trying to understand, can I drive? Can I not drive? Is there a product with THC, without it?
Yeah.
So we're navigating this for patients and their concerns.
I had a letter from a woman who has ovarian cancer, and she is on incredibly strong medications. She had a very good reaction to medicinal cannabis. She was on a trial. And it proved to be really effective for her. She reduced her level of opioid use, which made her far more alert during the day. She was sleeping better. But when her doctor said that she wouldn't be able to drive if she was to continue on this product, she stopped the trial because driving was so important to her independence. Yet the drug made her, the positive effects of this drug made her feel more independent and able to get out and about. But the flip side was she couldn't.
It's clearly quite a complex issue, and as you said, Tommy, it's regulated different from state to state, and I can only imagine driving is not the only issue that is going to be affected by medical cannabis. Moving perhaps a bit more into the what actually happens day to day. Tommy, you run an operation that exists in different states and employs a number of people. I just want to hear what is it like? What's the day-to-day operations like of Cannatrek?
So we're involved in complete vertical integration. We import seed, we're growing the plant, producing a flower, and all types of skill sets are required, really from A to Z. We need architects, we need accountants, we need builders, we need people to control the climate, agronomists, designers, engineers, research, IT, education, it's the list goes on. So it's a very colourful industry. It's challenging for startups because you need all those skills on day one, and we have limited resources, and these projects are quite heavy CapEx projects. But it definitely is not a boring office and environment. We were challenged by COVID-19. We're all virtual. I've been at home working for the last 18 months. I've been only once to our farm in Queensland. Our team is in and out of the office, but we've managed to actually grow quite quickly in the last 18 months. And there's been a real uptick on awareness, and also access has become far more easier because there's so many more doctors. I remember the very first doctor who from Victoria, from Melbourne, who prescribed, and it was, it took 3 or 4 months to get a script. Now it can take half an hour. So the system's working. We have a lot of work to do, and as Fiona mentioned, the price is the real challenge. It costs a lot to prepare and grow. It's a very hands-on product. We're not the lowest cost. It's in Australia we have reasonable wages compared to the rest of the world, so we have to be very competitive. But I'm hoping that Australia creates an essential medical supply chain. This is really important. We had a case last year. There were no flights into Australia, with people really screaming for medicine, and we were almost going to ship it in, from overseas, taking 2 to 3 months. So we've got to ensure that we can grow the product locally. We can always have it, and we hope that there'll be support in the supply chain, which the government has offered in terms of all types of industry support. But at the end of the day, if the patient can't afford a daily medicine, you won't be able to buy it, and that'll be a shame. So that's a real problem, unmet need, and I'm sure Fiona has got some ideas behind that. I think it'll play out more in the next 12 months, because the last thing we want is the haves and the have-nots to not be able to access this very natural therapeutic medicine.
Yeah.
Building a bit further, you mentioned very briefly COVID-19. Just to give, I guess, people a bit of an understanding of the complexity and maybe the scope of how Cannatrek operates, what are some other ways that COVID-19 impacted your business?
Well, besides the difficulty in bringing freight, at the moment we're importing around 90% of our medicines. Our project farm in Queensland is now in perpetual harvest. That's released its first product early this year. So we're slowly pivoting from an importer to a local production in a supply chain. We have over 50 people in our team and growing quite quickly. The industry is growing at about 10% month on month, and our business is growing at about 16 to 18%. So we are constantly having to employ more people, which is great, and to train people, and specifically in the cannabis plant, how it, especially in the greenhouses. But COVID-19, it actually accelerated the interest and the demand. Unfortunately, we had a massive spike in need around mental health and sleep and anxiety, and people tried the product, and we did see some very good results, and people are continuing to use the product. So that's an unfortunate benefit that we had a crisis, and we're still in a pandemic crisis at the moment. We're just glad we can provide a natural product which helps people have a better quality of life. I think the big issue with COVID is supply chain of bringing in. You can probably see behind me. I'll move to the left. That's our glass house, which we're planning to build in Shepparton. We're phase 1. Hopefully, we'll start getting up in the next few months. But a lot of the glass, the metal, a lot of the key ingredients comes from overseas, and that is a real concern. Freight is a real problem. It doesn't matter what product you're trying to bring into Australia. So we're grateful we have one farm up. The next one, it's going to be interesting with the COVID supply chain.
I'd love to delve a little bit deeper into both of your personal connections to the issue itself. Fiona, we'll start with you. Why is the issue so important to you, and why have you made it, I guess, a major part of your platform politically?
Look, I suppose this notion and this mantra of treating adults as adults has been something that has been part of my political journey. So I've always had an interest in drug law reform, but I understand, and in that, particularly when you're looking at cannabis, and particularly when you're looking at how cannabis laws have reformed and have changed around the world, it was the understanding of its therapeutic and medical attributes and benefits that very often were the first steps to changing the laws around cannabis. And we've come a long way in medicinal cannabis research and the work that's been done since probably, I think California was, or Colorado, or Oregon was probably one of the first states in the early 90s to allow for the sale of medicinal cannabis and the prescribing of medicinal cannabis. We've come a long way, but I've been watching that for the last 20 or 30 years with great interest and with great, and really these days, it's actually the people that I speak to, the constituents that I speak to, and I would get, and my office might be a bit different, but I would get 3 or 4 emails or phone calls every week from people asking questions about medicinal cannabis. And I noticed Max, just on that, I mean, Max has just raised, Max and Benny have raised some of the studies that they've read about some of the, that whether medicinal cannabis helps with pain relief or things like that. No drug helps everyone. No medicine helps everyone. But what we have found is for some people, medicinal cannabis has been a lifesaver. It has been remarkable in enabling them to manage their pain, in enabling them to manage their anxiety, enabling them to have a better quality of life while they're on chemotherapy. And it's those stories of people who've really, have just had some of the toughest life experiences that, this product has given them their lives back. And as I say, there wouldn't be a week where we don't get a number of calls from people asking for ways for us to assist them to access this product. And it's still, while it's getting a lot better, price is still really prohibitive. Also things like drug testing at work. There's a range of other regulations that make it difficult for patients to try this medicine and use this medicine. But yeah, I think it's been this last 20 or 30 years looking at the journey, particularly of cannabis. And I think, probably the pioneers in this, and it's interesting to be at the Lamm Library because the pioneers of a lot of this research and work was some of the Dr. Didi in Israel, who really, Israel is still probably a good decade ahead of a lot of other countries in the research work that they're doing. Victoria is helping with some of the genomic testing and some of the genomic mapping. And they're working we've got people at La Trobe working with universities in Israel. But yeah, there's been a lot of work around the world, and I just feel that Australians should have the opportunity to access this medicine as well.
Interesting, you mentioned about so some people the medicine would be working and others, there's no effect. I remember when I visited Israel and met Professor Raphael Meshulam, and he told me about there were 2 young children with epilepsy, both the same age, had exactly the same type of epilepsy. They got the same product, and one child it worked well and the other child it didn't. And that's an example, because the cannabis, the product wasn't an API, meaning it wasn't one particular cannabinoid. It was a range of cannabinoids. And this is where it gets really complex. So it's very much, it's unfortunately hit and miss from a therapeutic point of view. So we're going to see two types of industries. We're going to see a therapeutic industry using full spectrum cannabinoids. So that means that we take the flower from the plant, we extract it just like you might extract olive oil or some kind of other herbal flower, and it contains so many different cannabinoids. The beauty of the cannabis plant, they call it the king of the herbs. It has hundreds of actives. Most plants have one or two. You know, it's completely out of its league compared to any other plant in existence. It certainly it shows that we have to really look in these two different avenues, both from a full spectrum perspective and also from a typical farmer route where we're taking the THC or the CBD and looking at different medical indications and going through the traditional pharmaceutical trials of trying to locate the active and how it acts on a particular medical indication. So a lot of work to do still.
Fiona mentioned clearly, many of the personal stories and the experiences that she'd encountered were, I guess, the motivation for becoming so passionate about the issue. Tommy, if I read your Cannatrek bio correctly, it sounds like there was similar motivation for you personally to get involved in the industry. Do you maybe want to talk about that?
Yeah, I was in Israel over 7 years ago, and I managed to visit all the farms, and this is before the legislation in 2016. And there was a particular person I met, and he was a bomb sapper. He used to be the soldier that would go and, when then there was a bag in the street, someone had to go with a robot and see if it's a bomb or not. And he was very lucky, but the bomb exploded and there was a massive shock. And he was actually the first soldier to apply for medicinal cannabis for PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And when I met this particular soldier, I was intrigued that this plant could actually help him get back on his feet. And that was I think the trigger. I'd known people unfortunately had also traumatic events, and the amount of traditional pharmaceutical drugs that they took was quite scary. And that alerted me to start saying, hang on, this is going to come to Australia. It's going to come to every single country. Israel was leading. It was almost, light years away. This is back in, 2010. The industry had been up and running for 8 years back in, even earlier than that. So that when I realized that, this plant, which had been demonized, and all we hear was not the best kind of stories about it, I decided to drill down a bit deeper. And I had some time on my hands, and I visited all the farms and started to ask the right questions. So I was just in the right time, the right place and the right time. And when the legislation passed in November 2016, I already had the application lodged in with the federal government after 30 days. And before I knew it, I got a phone call from Canberra, and I was talking to the regulator. So I tried to bring a lot of the science and the medicine and the industry knowledge from Israel, and be able to contribute to the industry here.
It's definitely a very cool way of starting up. What I thought I might go to next, just before we jump into, I guess, the more legislative and regulatory processes that might be involved in the industry. We obviously talk a lot about what medical cannabis actually is, and we've described it briefly. But I thought maybe to get a bit of a better understanding, either one of you could answer what the key differences are between, let's say, recreational use and medical use, and how those differ in reality, and that might give people a better understanding of what we mean.
Yeah, I guess I'll go back to that first point that I make, that it would, if you from outside, you would say medicinal cannabis is the product you get a prescription for. It's the product that you go through that medical process. It's the product that goes through the pharmaceutical process of the Therapeutic Goods Authority. But in reality, I know so many people who say that they use cannabis because it helps them sleep. They use cannabis because it enables them to focus on something, or it helps with anxiety, or it helps with pain, or whatever the reason it might be. But those people are not getting a prescription. So I think there's a very blurry line. And I think I would see the therapeutic benefits of a glass of good red wine sometimes after a long day. Now, is that medicinal, or is that, we don't call drinking wine recreational. We just, it just is. And I think that the line with cannabis, because it is effectively a herb that can be sort of grown just about anywhere. There's a blurry line between adult use of cannabis and medicinal use of cannabis. But to make it easy for regulators, to make it easy for politicians, I like to kind of keep medicinal cannabis over in Tommy's world, and the world where it's grown by license holders, and it's regulated, so that we can ensure good manufacturing processes and the like.
I think it's important to note that the TGA have a very strict manufacturing criteria, which makes sure that we don't use pesticides. We have ladybugs in our greenhouse. The good bugs eat the bad bugs. We're trying to ensure, and the TGA 93 is a standard where we have to check off any heavy metals or pesticides or anything. Unfortunately, the street cannabis, you don't know how it's grown. And more than likely, it's grown with very serious boosters, recipes, whatever you want to call it, to get a good product, because the objective is probably profit. However, I did notice that Fiona mentioned there was an interesting survey done that a lot of the maybe illicit growers are doing it for medical use. So their patients or customers, however you want to call them, self-medicating. So there is that side of the industry which is very strong. What we as legislated growers, we're bound by a clean green product. Our challenge is to have good economies of scale, efficiencies, which we're working on. Our plan is to have really a showpiece of innovation, of behind the meter energy on our beautiful farm in Shepparton. We've got the longest sunlight days probably in Australia. We've got plenty of water, plenty of great human resources who are familiar with agricultural crops. So they're the positives that we believe once we have commercialized at a larger scale, we'll be able to produce a product without doubt far less cost than any garage grower or wherever people are growing it. But the important thing to say is that those toxins are not good for you. We don't know what they are, and that's the really difference between street cannabis and medical cannabis, which is legislated. At the end of the day, cannabis is a plant. We're fortunate that this plan has been put in a legislative framework, which it was a bit clunky, but now it's been streamlined so much more, where it can be accessed. You go to your doctor, you get a script, and you pick it up from the pharmacy. I feel that the Australian approach and the legislation has a future. Just that price point is an issue, because as you know, a product on the PBS, it might cost $50, $60, $100 or $6. So I don't know if we can get there yet, but we want to prove that that medical cannabis products, I believe some of the products can help in preventative healthcare. And if we can prove that, that may shave quite a lot of serious dollars from the macro health budget of states. You know, we've got a lot of really serious medical issues. Maybe this product will actually be able to flow through and provide some great preventative care. We'll only know that probably in another 10 years or so. You know, it'll take a while.
If I can just add to that, what Tommy's saying is that there's a recent study that I actually raised in Parliament last week, which was looking at workers' compensation claims of workers aged between 40 and 60 in states where medicinal cannabis had been legalized. And they said that there was a 14 to 16% reduction in workers' compensation claims from that cohort of people in jurisdictions where medicinal cannabis was available and legal, and which was really interesting. And adding to that, more people die of opioid overdoses in Australia, in Victoria, than die on our roads. Our death by overdose is almost double our road toll in Victoria. And what we're finding in some jurisdictions, and the evidence really is emerging, in those jurisdictions where medicinal cannabis is available, they are seeing death by opioid overdose, accidental opioid overdose, reduce substantially.
Yeah, we don't actually, when I applied for the license back in 2016, we did a small, wasn't so small, but we looked at opioid mismanagement in aged care. And we saw that it could really save, you know, $1.2 billion if it was managed better. So, and for a new medicine to potentially solve that issue. So we're talking about some serious health impacts on a macro scale.
I think it's a really good point maybe to delve into for the next few minutes, because as you both kind of talked about very briefly, it's clear that there's kind of mixed evidence in terms of how medical cannabis impacts pain relief, how it might impact the medical industry itself. And you know, we've talked about the differing results that you see between patient to patient. So I would love to know from both an industry and a political perspective, how do you actually advocate for the industry if the evidence that you have behind you is fairly inconsistent?
Fiona, do you want to answer that one?
Look, I'll answer in a very specific way, because it's something that's I'm focused on at the moment. And this is actually about the prohibition on medicinal cannabis patients from driving, because I think that is one of the biggest barriers to the medicinal cannabis industry. And that's from someone who's not in the industry. So, but I see it as an extraordinary barrier. I see it also as a very stigmatizing. It has a very stigmatizing effect, that somehow this product is more dangerous than an oxycodone, or more dangerous than a Valium, that so that you are literally prohibited. So I'm working really hard to see some form of medical exemption for medicinal cannabis patients, so they can drive when they are not impaired. So we're not talking about people driving under the influence. We're talking about people just being allowed to go about their daily business when, you know, take the kids to school in the morning, when they might have used a cannabis oil in the evening and they've ended up having a terrific night's sleep. So they're actually more alert than they would have been without the medicine. And so to me, that is my major focus this year. And I do believe that will change attitudes towards medicinal cannabis, but it will also open up the medicinal cannabis to a lot of other people, a lot of patients who would benefit from it, who cannot now, because they cannot live without being able to use a car.
Tommy, anything to add?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one, the car driving issue and the legislation. the humans produce cannabis. Mother's milk has cannabinoids in it. How do you think a baby goes to sleep so nicely? I mean, so the question is scientifically, are they able to measure impairment or not, or is it self-assessed? And I think that's probably hopefully that's where it will go, because it's part of our system. We're trying to get homeostasis. The whole point is that our body has this endocannabinoid system. It's the largest system in the body, and it's out of kilter. So cannabis can actually get us balanced and create that balanced frame of mind for a lot of these indications, which are really hard to measure. So it is going to be challenging for the legislators to know. It's not like alcohol, but as far as I understand, there's no real test to really identify specifically. It's all over the place, which is going to be tough for judges looking at cases as well.
Look, if you could find a 0.05 for cannabis, that would be politically really simple, really straightforward, but you can't. But also, we don't test people for opioids. We don't test them for benzodiazepines. We don't test them for other things. What we do is the doctor and the patient talk through this. They talk through the risk assessments. They talk about, don't drive when you're feeling impaired. Maybe just take this product, small amounts, and see how you go. Just take it in, you might choose to take it in the evenings rather than the mornings. If you do take some and you're feeling a bit impaired, well, don't drive. So we can do it. Every other jurisdiction pretty much in the world provides a defense. And in Victoria, if you're found, if you actually crash your car and you were found to have had a couple of Valiums as per prescribed by your doctor, you get a medical defense on that. You're not charged with any driving offence because you were taking a medicine as prescribed. And by excluding medicinal cannabis from that, by treating it as something completely different to other medicines, that I think is really holding back the industry and is holding back a lot of the really good work that the industry can do and a lot of good work that this medicine can do.
One of the, I guess, main questions that I'm seeing from the chat, and also I've had a few sent to me privately, is around affordability and price. It's something that both of you have raised as a significant challenge within the industry. I might read out a few of the questions that have been sent through and then also maybe just prompt you on another. But why is the product so expensive? Why is it so unaffordable for people trying to access it? What is a potential path for medical cannabis to come into the pharmaceutical benefit scheme so it could be more affordable? These are some of the questions we've had. So either of you want to jump in?
Yeah, it's one of the initiatives that we've taken is for instance, concession card holders, we give a straight 10% discount. We are offering an efficacy trial on all the products, the oils that we're prescribing, so patients can try and test the product. So we're trying to do our best as producers to be able to provide directly some kind of help. We see patients for life. We want to be with them, to serve them, to provide them the appropriate product. If one doesn't work, an example, we have a carrier oil with MCT, which is like a coconut sourced carrier oil, or sunflower oil, or hemp seed oil. So some people have different reactions to the carrier oil, not the product. So, we try and do what we can as a service provider to the industry. But when it comes to the PBS, which is an unbelievable support for large-scale medicines, which the majority of demographics and populations may use, we're really hoping that I think once we see the volume or the demographic of the population, we may be able to have better conversations with the TGA and the political echelons on how we can make it more affordable, without specifically waiting all these years to pass, the different phases of a typical blockbuster which gets to market. We don't have time. People need the medicine today, and that problem we must solve now. And so we're.
So I was going to say, Tommy's great, and I think there has been some really generous philanthropy, for want of a better word, from the industry itself in providing the medicine to many people who just can't afford it on their own. We've seen some government trials, and certainly children with intractable epilepsy was one of the government trials that the Victorian state government funded. I would like to see, I think we really should be trying to push governments into some further trials, which would also assist there. One of the other areas is looking at insurance companies, is looking at TAC, is looking at Department of Veterans Affairs, because as Tommy talked about earlier, thinking of that soldier with PTSD and the benefits that he found from medicinal cannabis, I hear that a lot. And I know Department of Veterans Affairs hears that a lot. And they will fund some medication for some pain, some symptoms such as pain, but they're not open to funding the product for other areas. So I think we've really got to push people like the TAC, people like the Department of Veterans Affairs, that will help broaden the availability of the product, which will bring the price down, but also will make it, once you have that larger consumer base, I think you're right, having those conversations about some of those products going on to the PBS is much more possible, but it certainly doesn't seem like something we're going to be doing in the next couple of years.
Yeah, it's certainly a difficult challenge, and it would be really a waste for companies like ourselves to spend on marketing and distribution, which isn't really, it's an unnecessary expense. We want to work with the demographic, and I think if we model it, with different particular indications, I'm hoping that there will be a meeting of the eyes to again help the patient, because that's what we're here for at the end of the day.
Just conscious of time, we've only got a few minutes left. So I think maybe what we'll do is wrap it up with one final question. I'd love to hear from both of you what you see as the greatest challenge facing the industry moving forward. And then additionally, what's your greatest hope for the industry as we move forward? Tommy, we'll start with you.
Can you just repeat the question again? Sorry, I was just reading the questions in the chat.
Yeah, no worries. So the question is, what do you see as the biggest challenge moving forward in the industry? And additionally, what's the greatest hope you have for the industry moving forward?
I'll answer the second question first. My greatest hope is that Australia and Victoria, where I'm standing, or sitting at the moment, can be a leader in the world. I think we've got everything going for us. Biggest challenge is the speed. We would have liked to have had our farm up behind me, but unfortunately COVID, froze everything for a year. And I think that, Australia has a great opportunity. The research we're doing here is world class. I don't know, in such a short time, there is so many research being conducted with many institutions, hospitals. The Murdoch Children Research Institute is doing some unbelievable work on behavioural disorders for kids with autism. So my hope is that we're going to get to the end game really quickly.
You've cut out there, Tommy.
I'm sorry?
There you go. You cut out there for a second. Just continue. Yeah,
so my hope was that we see results far quicker with some of the patient groups that we're helping. The biggest challenge, I think, is the research. And we hope the government support the different research trials, and because I think that's going to accelerate the results that we're looking for. It's very hard for stakeholders like ourselves to do everything, and that's probably been the biggest challenge. We have to be everything, and we're hoping we can share the responsibility a bit.
Yeah.
Thanks, Joey. And yeah, I'm actually largely almost 100% in saying the same things as Tommy, is that this is an opportunity. Australia is really recognised as being clean and green and having really high manufacturing standards. We could be a world supplier for this product. We could be really, one of the big guys in the marketplace. Our climate is good for it. Our stability of government is good for it. We just need to, I think the biggest challenge is getting over the stigma of it. I think there is still a lot of stigma around medicinal cannabis. So where people are happy to take would prefer to take an opioid or a benzodiazepine instead of medicinal cannabis because there is still stigma around it. And that is reflected in legislation where things like roadside drug testing, things like workplace drug testing can really exclude medicinal cannabis patients. And I want to see those things change. I think again, I agree with Tommy, one of the opportunities for government is to get behind the industry, see it as something that we can take to the world as a really sophisticated market in this really broad-ranging medicine. So look, the state government put out a strategy, a medicinal cannabis industry strategy in 2018, early 2018. Going back and having a look at it this afternoon, they're a little bit behind on their timeline. So certainly it's work that I can see that we can do, but there's interest there. It's now just capturing that imagination and capturing that goodwill.
A very hopeful place to finish. I'm going to do a big thank you to both of you in just a moment. But before I do, I just want to give a bit of a brief plug to the library. For those unaware of the library's work, we're one of the largest Jewish information resource centres in Australia. We've got titles in English, Hebrew and Yiddish. We've also got an extensive ebook collection, which is very easy to use on our website. The Write Your Story program has published over 140 memoirs and is now one of the largest publishers of Holocaust memoirs in English in the world. We also run a range of interesting programs and events, including author talks, learning series lectures like these, discussions, children's programs, our book club, and more. So if anyone's looking for events to come to and initiatives that they can be a part of, all of our upcoming events are going to be on our website, our Facebook, our Instagram, all over social media. So we look forward to seeing you in the library. With that, I'm going to bring the discussion to an end. Thank you both for taking the time. It's a very interesting topic of conversation and one that maybe isn't discussed widely enough. So Fiona, to you, thank you very much. Tommy, to you as well. Thank you very much. And with that, we're gonna end the night. So thank you everyone for coming and supporting the library as always. And if you'd like to watch it again, we're going to be releasing it on social media probably sometime later this week. So thank you everyone for coming and thank you to our speakers.
Thank you, Joey. Thank you, Fiona.
Thanks.
And thank you to the Lamm Library.